They said I wasn't smart enough for the family business, but then I bought out their biggest competitor and took everything. They didn't even say it to my face. I overheard it, like I always did, behind closed doors, whispered in conference rooms, traded like casual gossip between board members who carried my last name but never once looked at me as an equal. To them, I was just Elliot, the soft-spoken, artistic, sensitive, youngest son of a business empire that worshipped only one god, profit. My family ran Whitmore and Sons, one of the largest privately held real estate development firms on the East Coast. Mansions, high-rises, malls, stadiums, if it had concrete and a price tag, my family had a piece of it. Everyone in my family had a role. My father was the CEO and face of the company, my brother Chase was the numbers genius, and my sister Victoria was the PR powerhouse. And then there was me. From as far back as I could remember, I was labeled extra. Too quiet. Too emotional. Too slow. While Chase was learning how to read spreadsheets at 9, I was building model cities out of Legos, and that somehow became evidence I lacked business instincts. My mother, ever the diplomat, used to say things like, "You have a beautiful soul, Elliot. Don't worry about the company." I wanted to belong. Desperately. Not for the money or the power. I just wanted to be seen. To matter. At 15, I asked my father if I could help during the summer. Just basic intern stuff. Answer phones. Get coffee. Shadow meetings. He sighed. "The business is complicated, Elliot. Maybe next year." Next year never came. Instead, I watched as Chase, only 2 years older than me, was already sitting in on budget calls and negotiating mock deals with Dad's old college friends. Victoria, 3 years older, was flown to New York to sit in on branding sessions for a new luxury condo line. Meanwhile, I was asked to help Mom organize the pantry. I kept my mouth shut. I worked harder. I took AP Economics. I aced calculus. I even applied for and got accepted into Stanford's undergraduate business program, something no Whitmore had ever done. When I came home that summer, proud, hopeful, ready to talk about my ideas, my dad congratulated me and then handed me a book titled, "When to Step Aside: Knowing Your Place in a Family Business." It wasn't even subtle. I still remember sitting alone on the back patio of our beach house that night, wondering why nothing I ever did was enough. Was it because I didn't talk as loud? Because I like listening more than dominating rooms? Or was it because I didn't play dirty like Chase, who once accidentally leaked my final essay to our professor so I'd get a 0? They didn't just overlook me, they erased me. By the time I graduated, I already knew the truth. No matter how hard I worked, how smart I became, they had already decided I didn't belong. I applied for a position at the company anyway, out of some pathetic sense of duty. I got a 2-line email from HR. "We appreciate your interest in Whitmore and Sons. Unfortunately, no roles are available that match your background at this time." I laughed. Out loud. I remember it so clearly. Sitting in the hallway outside my apartment in California, staring at that email and realizing that my own family had ghosted me. And that's when the fire started. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something deeper, quieter. A cold clarity that spread through my chest and settled into my bones. They'll never let me in, so I'll build my own door and make sure they regret locking theirs. I started small, quiet. I took a job at a mid-sized real estate investment firm in San Diego. It wasn't glamorous. I was a junior analyst, crunching numbers and analyzing trends for projects no one cared about, but I paid attention. I learned. I read everything. I asked questions no one else thought to ask. I stayed late. I built models. I mapped out housing demands based on school district performance. I found tiny patterns no one was seeing. Within a year, I was promoted. By year 2, I was leading my own research team. But more importantly, I started watching my family. Not personally. Not emotionally. Strategically. Whitmore and Sons was growing fast, too fast. I noticed they were buying up luxury condos in areas where demand was dipping. They were betting big on short-term spikes. It was flashy, great for headlines, but horrible for long-term returns. And then I saw it. One name that kept coming up in their path. a rising competitor they constantly underestimated: Helix Properties. Helix wasn't flashy. They bought smart, renovated modestly, and focused on middle-income housing in growing markets. Their returns were steady. Their leadership, a woman named Dana Knox, had a reputation for running lean, sharp teams. My brother once mocked them in an interview, calling them a glorified mom and pop. That's when I knew what I had to do. I left my job quietly, cashed out my stock, liquidated every cent of my modest trust fund. I contacted Dana directly. At first, she thought I was joking. "You're a Whitmore," she said. "What could you possibly want from Helix?" I smiled. To build something better, and to crush them. That got her attention. I showed her what I'd built, a 10-year plan, backed by research and analytics. I showed her exactly how Whitmore and Sons was over-leveraged, where their weaknesses were, and how Helix could outmaneuver them. But I didn't just want to be an advisor. I wanted in. I offered everything I had, every dollar, every connection, every hour, in exchange for 30% equity and a seat at the table. She negotiated me down to 20%, but the deal was done. I moved back east. Quietly. Without fanfare. No press release. Helix wasn't my family's rival yet. But it was about to be. Helix wasn't just a competitor anymore. It was my battlefield. For the next 3 years, I poured everything I had into it. I worked longer hours than I thought humanly possible. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a noisy pizza shop, surviving on caffeine, ambition, and spite. While my family flaunted their lives in glossy magazines and Forbes interviews, I was out in worn-down neighborhoods studying land values, talking to city councilmen, and helping low-income families secure housing loans. Dana became both mentor and shield. She believed in facts, not legacy. I wasn't Elliot Whitmore to her, I was just the guy who got results. Together, we turned Helix into a precision machine. While my family spent fortunes on skyscrapers and oversaturated markets, we built our empire in the shadows, repurposing abandoned warehouses into thriving townhomes, investing in overlooked suburban corridors, creating sustainable housing models in places the Whitmores wouldn't dare look. And it worked. We weren't making headlines, but we were eating into their market share like termites in the foundation. And they didn't notice. Not at first. Until Eden Crossing. It was supposed to be their crown jewel. A $300 million luxury smart city community with condos, artificial lakes, shopping plazas, all nestled into what used to be farmland outside Raleigh. They'd snatched up most of the land years ago, but they'd overlooked one thing: the zoning approvals still had to go through the county. And Helix? We had already spent the last 2 years buying up the surrounding area, quietly acquiring influence with the planning committee. When the final vote came in, a 3-2 rejection, Whitmore and Sons lost everything they'd sunk into Eden Crossing. That's when they noticed us. I was sitting in a Helix board meeting when Victoria called. I hadn't heard her voice in years. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Is this your revenge?" she asked coldly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb, Elliot. You knew Eden Crossing was Dad's legacy project." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the city map we had pinned on the wall. Then maybe he should have looked past the luxury golf course model and actually understood community planning. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I always thought you didn't have the guts." Guess I was wrong. Click. That was the moment I realized something had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was dangerous. And just like that, the Whitmores declared war. They started by trying to buy us out. 3 different shell companies, all connected to their inner circle, approached Dana with offers. Big offers. Enough to make most people walk away. But we didn't. Next came the smear campaigns. Articles began appearing in real estate blogs, questioning our environmental practices, accusing us of shady permitting tactics, all anonymous sources, of course. A few city council members who'd once supported us suddenly changed their votes. Funding partners began hesitating. I knew exactly where it was coming from. So I struck back, not through retaliation, but precision. I began leaking my family's own internal missteps to the very outlets they used against us. Overextended debt. Lawsuits buried in court systems. The fact that their high-rise in Baltimore was sitting half-empty because it violated wind shear codes and failed an engineering inspection, which I happened to have documents for. The media turned. Slowly, but publicly. For the first time in 2 decades, Whitmore and Sons looked vulnerable. And they hated it. I should have been prepared for what came next, but I wasn't. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the email. Subject: urgent. Helix internal. Attachment: PDF. Board vote. Emergency session. I opened the file. It was a proposal from Dana and the board to sell Helix to Whitmore and Sons. What? I read it again and again. My brain couldn't process it. They were offering a full acquisition, cash payout, retention bonuses for leadership, and a non-compete clause that would bar me from the real estate industry for 10 years. 10 years. I ran to Dana's office. She was already waiting for me. Tell me this is a joke, I said, slamming the door behind me. She looked tired, older than I'd ever seen her. They doubled the offer, she said quietly. It's enough to retire. Enough for everyone. They're destroying us. They're offering to save us. I shook my head in disbelief. You're siding with them? She didn't answer. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk. Inside, emails, screenshots, a spreadsheet. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She'd been talking to them for months. Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. Her eyes softened. Because I watched your family destroy you, Elliot. And now I'm watching you become exactly like them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But I didn't. Instead, I walked out. The next day, the board voted 5-1 in favor of the sale. My vote was the only dissenting voice. Just like that, I lost everything. For a while, I disappeared. I moved into a one-bedroom rental outside Boston. Turned off my phone. Didn't answer emails. I watched from a distance as the headlines rolled in. Whitmore and Sons acquires Helix in major power move. Family empire reunites with a strange Sons company. Is this the end of the Elliott-Whitmore rivalry? They called it a win. But it wasn't over. Because they didn't just buy Helix. They absorbed it. Rebranded the logo. Scrubbed my name from every record. Claimed their leadership saw the opportunity all along. And the worst part? They offered me a job. Director of Emerging Markets, a title that meant nothing, a desk buried in the back of an office I built. I declined. But I didn't forget. They thought they'd beaten me. They thought they'd stolen my legacy, buried my ambition, and reminded me once and for all that I would never be one of them. They had no idea what I was planning. Because while they were busy gloating, they missed the one thing I never lost. Leverage. They stole everything. My company, my vision, my name. But they forgot one thing. I don't break. When Helix fell, I could have walked away. Disappeared. Let them believe they'd won. And for a brief moment, I almost did. But revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a press release or a screaming match. It moves in silence. It waits. So I waited. From my small apartment, I watched as my family paraded their victory across headlines. Chase gave interviews about how the acquisition of Helix was always part of the long-term strategy. Victoria boasted about reuniting the Whitmore bloodline under one brand. My father, in a particularly nauseating interview, said, "Sometimes you have to let your children fall so they can learn how to come home." As if Helix had been a tantrum. A mistake. They didn't even acknowledge that I'd built something stronger, leaner, more respected than anything they touched in years. To them, I was still the soft one, the failure. And that's what made them vulnerable. Because while they celebrated, I started building again. The first person I called was Amara Patel, our former sustainability lead at Helix. She'd been ousted in the rebrand, not flashy enough for the new Whitmore image. But she was brilliant. I offered her 10% equity in a venture I hadn't even named yet. She didn't hesitate. When do we start? Next, I called Gabriel Moss, a quiet, underrated software engineer who had been developing smart home integration systems for Helix before the acquisition. He designed a prototype that would have revolutionized low-cost housing infrastructure, but the Whitmores shelved it in favor of their luxury condo line. He joined the same day. By the end of the month, I had 6 people, all discarded by Whitmore and Sons, all hungry. I didn't start a company. I started a rebellion. But we stayed quiet. No press. No incorporation. No big fundraising rounds. Instead, I used the one thing they hadn't taken from me: information. See, while Dana and the board had betrayed me, they hadn't changed the internal systems Helix used for 5 years. And those systems? I had helped build them. I still had access to vendor logs, construction forecasts, permit filings, and more importantly, I knew where the cracks were. I knew which projects Whitmore and Sons had taken on that were unsustainable, where they'd overpaid, where they were bleeding money under the surface. I knew which contractors they were screwing over, which partners were being kept in the dark, which investors were nervous. I didn't just know how the house was built. I knew where to set the fire. We launched under the name Blackridge Development, a shell name, quiet, clean, registered out of Delaware with no direct ties to me. Our first 3 projects were small: 2 multifamily developments in Charlotte, 1 office to condo conversion in Pittsburgh. We didn't go head to head with the Whitmores yet. We built quietly, efficiently. Word spread. By the second year, we had $18 million in assets. Then $30 million. Still no headlines. Still no ties to me. Until we made our move. The Whitmores were planning a massive expansion into Austin, a tech-driven urban oasis called Crescent Yards. It was meant to be their future: smart living, high-density luxury housing, AI-powered design systems. But I knew something they didn't. Their main tech partner, Vanguard Designs, had been struggling. Supply chain issues, and SEC audit, and massive layoffs were quietly draining them. Whitmore and Sons had sunk $90 million into the project based on Vanguard's tech roadmap, a roadmap that was already collapsing. And Vanguard was open to acquisition. They weren't just vulnerable. They were desperate. I moved fast. Quietly. Through Blackridge, I partnered with a private equity firm, one that owed me a favor from my Helix days, and we acquired Vanguard under a different holding name. 3 months later, Whitmore and Sons got the email. Due to structural realignments in R&D, Vanguard Designs will be terminating the existing development contract with Whitmore and Sons, effective immediately. Crescent Yards imploded. $90 million gone. The media speculated. The Whitmore stock plummeted. Investors panicked. Victoria tried to spin it as a strategic pivot, but no one was buying it. Chase blamed internal miscommunication. My father? He disappeared from the public eye. And I just watched. Silently. Because the best part? They still didn't know it was me. Until the invitation arrived. I'd been keeping tabs on every board meeting agenda I could access through their investor portals. And one caught my eye. Emergency proposal: merge with Stonebridge Holdings. Stonebridge. Their last lifeline. A larger, older firm based in London, conservative, traditional, and risk-averse. The kind of firm that could stabilize them, or swallow them whole. I needed to be there. So I made sure I was. Blackridge, still anonymous to them, had just acquired a key portfolio in Dallas that Whitmore and Sons was trying to win. That made us strategic interests, and I got an invitation to a closed-door real estate executive forum being held at the Whitmore Private Clubhouse in Manhattan. I walked in that day wearing a dark blue suit, no tie, and a quiet smirk. It had been 7 years since I stepped foot in a Whitmore building. The moment I walked into the room, Chase's jaw locked. Victoria stood up. "What the hell is he doing here?" she hissed to one of the organizers. But it was too late. I was on the list. Publicly, they had to smile. Privately, they were unraveling. I shook hands. I sipped wine. I listened to their pitch to Stonebridge, full of buzzwords and half-truths. And then, I spoke. They didn't know Blackridge was mine until I stood up and said, If you're interested in a partnership that values sustainability, data-backed growth, and doesn't bury losses in marketing slides, I suggest you speak to us at Blackridge. We've already secured 3 of your target properties. And your competitors are calling. The room froze. My father wasn't there. He hadn't shown his face since Crescent Yards collapsed, but I could feel his presence in the silence. Chase was red. Victoria looked like she might throw something. And I smiled, bowed slightly, and walked out. The war had turned, and now it was my move. I didn't want their money. I wanted their legacy. I wanted the Whitmore name, the one that had always made doors swing open, phones get answered, people bow slightly to mean failure. By the time I left that executive forum, the press was already buzzing. Blackridge CEO emerges from the shadows to challenge Whitmore empire. Whitmore expansion plans derailed again. Elliot Whitmore, the prodigal son, becomes the ultimate threat. They couldn't spin it anymore. My name was out. The world knew who I was. And more importantly, what I had built. For the first time, people were finally asking, what if the wrong Whitmore took over? And now? Now I stopped playing quiet. Blackridge went on the offensive. We began acquiring every mid-tier property development firm the Whitmores had ignored or mistreated. These companies had talent, vision, and debt, and we gave them a lifeline. Within 6 months, we controlled 18% of the exact market segments Whitmore and Sons once dominated. Then we did something unprecedented. We launched a public buyout bid for one of their most bitter rivals, Grayson Lennox, a European real estate conglomerate the Whitmores had spent years trying to partner with. We succeeded in 30 days. Suddenly, I had assets in 8 countries, and Whitmore and Sons had nowhere left to expand without running through me. Their investors revolted. At the next shareholder meeting, for the first time in 42 years, the Whitmore family faced a no-confidence vote. Chase tried to stop it. Victoria threw her PR team into overdrive. But the numbers didn't lie. 40% drop in projected profits, 3 consecutive failed urban projects, 2 high-profile lawsuits from ex-partners. I didn't even have to be in the room when the board voted to restructure leadership and bring in external stabilization counsel. But I was. I sat in the back of that glass conference room as Chase was removed as CFO and Victoria as VP of Public Affairs. My father, the great patriarch, was eerily silent on the conference call. All he said before hanging up was, I warned you. He always plays the long game. He wasn't wrong. But the final blow, the one I had been saving, wasn't corporate. It was personal. You see, buried in the Helix acquisition, tucked deep in the contracts, was a clause I had fought to include during our initial funding days. In the event of liquidation or forced restructuring, IP rights revert to original design contributors. They hadn't seen it. They were so eager to strip my name from the company, they never noticed that the infrastructure, the tech, the city layouts, the sustainable energy grids, all had my fingerprint. Every single file used in 14 current Whitmore projects? Mine. And now that they were restructuring, they had to stop using it. Immediately. Construction halted. Permits were voided. Investors fled. And then, I sued them. For unauthorized use of proprietary planning systems, breach of acquisition terms, and falsified brand attribution. They tried to fight it. They tried to settle. But I refused. Because the trial would be public. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, real estate analysts, former Helix employees, even a few professors from Stanford. I testified for 2 days. Exhibits A through M were design blueprints with my signature. Emails. Time-stamped commits in the software codebase. Financial models I had written by hand. The defense tried to discredit me. Called me emotional, vindictive, even implied I was mentally unstable, a classic Whitmore tactic. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when every fact, every figure, every spreadsheet pointed to one truth. I built the future they tried to steal. Verdict: $84 million in damages. A public apology published on the homepage of Whitmore and Sons for 30 days. and a court ordered removal of my name from all documents labeling me as former employee, because I was never employed by them. I was the enemy, and I had won. The next day, I walked into the old Whitmore building, not as a son, not as an intern, as a buyer. Because behind the scenes, while the trial had been playing out, I had been working with the board. Their stock was in free fall. Their leadership was shattered. Their name, once feared, was now mocked. And I made them an offer. Not to take over. To absorb. Blackridge would acquire Whitmore and Sons, pending a full leadership transition and rebranding. It wasn't a merger. It was an erasure. Chase stormed out of the boardroom before the vote even finished. Victoria refused to speak. My father didn't show up. And the board? Unanimous. As I stood outside the building after the vote, the new nameplate already being installed over the marble front entrance, a junior associate walked up to me. He looked nervous. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." He hesitated. "How does it feel? After everything?" I looked up at the new sign, Blackridge Global, and I smiled. It feels like I finally got the family business. The world thought that was the end of the story. That the kid who was laughed out of his own family's legacy finally rose, took the empire, and became the king. But that's not what happened. Because real power doesn't come from owning the building. It comes from what you do after you've locked the doors. 6 months after Blackridge officially absorbed Whitmore and Sons, I stood in the top floor corner office once occupied by my father. It had all the things he used to obsess over. The floor-to-ceiling glass, the polished desk with zero clutter, the mounted lucite model of the first skyscraper he ever built. I didn't touch any of it. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer where I knew he used to keep a private ledger, old school style, handwritten, for things he didn't trust to digital records. It was still there. And what I found inside changed everything. I turned the pages slowly at first. Project names, dates, loan approvals, handwritten notes. Some entries were crossed out, others marked with stars or underlines. Then I reached a section labeled Pines Hollow, 1999 to 2003. My heart stopped. Pines Hollow was a development my family never talked about. A failed suburban housing project that had been sold off years ago. I remembered it vaguely. I was 12 when it collapsed due to environmental concerns. But the paperwork in front of me told a different story. There were names, amounts, payouts, and worst of all, bribes. It detailed how the Whitmores had knowingly built over contaminated soil. How they had bribed inspectors to look the other way. How 4 families had gotten sick and been paid off to stay quiet. My father's handwriting was on all of it. And the last page? It had my name. If this comes back to us, blame Elliot. Uninvolved. Clean. He'd kept records in case he ever needed someone to take the fall. Me. The soft one. The emotional one. The one they'd never let in, but always kept close enough to sacrifice. I sat there for hours. Not angry. Not even shocked. Just cold. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a warning from the grave. Because my father wasn't just cruel. He was strategic, manipulative. And I suddenly realized he never thought he'd lose. This ledger? It wasn't a record. It was a trap. If any of this got out now, during Blackridge's rise, with my name on every deal, every project, it could all be used to frame me. To destroy everything I'd just built. So I made a decision. A brutal one. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I called Gabriel, my lead on digital architecture. I told him to pull every document that ever connected Helix, Blackridge, or my signature to the Pines Hollow zone. I cross-checked every transaction, every email, every handshake from 1999 to 2003. Most of it was clean, but some wasn't. Some of the systems Dana had transferred when she sold Helix, they were intertwined with old Whitmore shell companies. If anyone dug deep enough, and they would, eventually, they could pin everything on me. So I burned it. All of it. I deleted the logs. I wiped the metadata. I erased every fingerprint my father had hoped would one day ruin me. And then, I torched the ledger. Page by page, I fed it into the fireplace in that glossy office. The same fireplace he had once smoked cigars in while laughing about how expendable most people were. And when it was down to ashes, I picked up the lucite model of his first building and dropped it from the top floor balcony. It shattered into 1,000 pieces across the lobby marble. A week later, I stood in front of the board. "I'm stepping down as CEO," I said. "You could have heard a pin drop. I'll remain majority shareholder. But I'm appointing Amara as acting CEO effective immediately. And Blackridge will no longer pursue acquisitions. We're shifting to ethical development only, clean growth, zero displacement policies, full transparency audits." One of the board members scoffed. "That's not how you scale." I met his eyes. "No. That's how you sleep at night." Because I hadn't built Blackridge to become another Whitmore. I had built it to kill them. And now that they were dead, I had no interest in becoming their ghost. It's been 3 years since then. Blackridge is thriving, not in headlines, but in communities. We've built homes for veterans, redesigned urban schools into affordable housing, and invested in clean energy partnerships that actually work. Chase moved to Dubai. Victoria took a job at a PR firm and went silent. My father passed away, heart attack, they said. I didn't go to the funeral. But I did send flowers. With a single note. I was smart enough. Sometimes people ask me why I left. Why I gave it all up after I'd finally won. And the answer is simple. Because revenge isn't just about taking everything. It's about knowing you could have. And choosing not to become them. Because in the end, they said I wasn't smart enough for the family business. But then I bought out their biggest competitor. And took everything. Even their conscience.